If you're pregnant and you're counting coffees instead of how much rest you need, this video is for you. Because the question isn't really how much caffeine is safe in pregnancy, but why do you even need the caffeine to get through your day? That's the true question. And once you understand that, I think the coffee debate changes completely and hopefully gives you a renowned sense of ownership over how much caffeine you choose to drink whilst you're pregnant. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the guidelines and what they specifically say about caffeine consumption in pregnancy, what the research around caffeine in pregnancy actually suggests, because spoiler alert, it doesn't coincide with the guideline, and why, most importantly, caffeine has become such a mainstay in pregnancy in the first place. So stick with me, because this isn't really just about the coffee, but how pregnancy is structured, especially in the first trimester, and the conversations around it. So something I don't think we acknowledge enough is that coffee is normalized. I mean, the whole culture around coffee is amazing. In the US, it's reported 80% of women will drink coffee, 90% in France, and in the UK, it's closer to 45% of women who are drinking coffee. And caffeine isn't just found in coffee, it's in tea, Coca-Cola, wellness products, even some medication. Some of the painkillers that we take will have caffeine in it. So caffeine can be found in just about anything, and it's really woven into modern life, especially the modern working life, just to get us through the day. And I think that really matters when we start talking about pregnancy specifically. I'm Remi, I'm an obs and gynae doctor, and I spend my time looking at where the guidelines stop and where real life begins for women and what the gap is, and that's what I'll be explaining on this channel. So guidelines in the Americas, Europe and the UK suggest that pregnant women shouldn't consume more than 200 milligrams of caffeine a day. And like I said, you can find it in an array of products. So a cup of coffee, instant coffee, might be closer to 100 milligrams, where a filter coffee would be closer to 140 milligrams. A cup of English breakfast tea could be about 75 milligrams of caffeine. And then you've got things like Coca-Cola or other cola products that might be 40 milligrams of caffeine. And then you've got energy drinks, hidden herbal teas that may well contain caffeine in them. You really need to read the small print. And for me, the real surprise was chocolate. You could get dark chocolate, which has a lower amount of caffeine, closer to about 10 milligrams, and then milk chocolate, which has more and is closer to about 25 milligrams. So if you have this 200 milligram limit in your head, you could have 1 cup of coffee, you could have potentially a cup of tea, if you'd had an instant coffee, and then a tiny bit of chocolate. Or you could have a really fancy coffee with a higher caffeine, and then you might end up with 1 can of Coke in the afternoon, and that's it. Your coffee limit is met. But just because the guideline says that it's safe, does it actually mean that it is? Guidelines are produced for population level safety and don't always necessarily take into account the physiology behind it. And you know, there'll be women who drink a lot more than the recommended value, and there are women who stick to the value, and there are women who drink a lot less. But all of those may well have risks associated with it, according to some studies. There's a growing body of evidence that caffeine itself can be beneficial to adults. It can reduce cognitive impairment in later life, has been shown to reduce the risk of developing some cancer, so on and so forth. But that is not the same for a fetus. When you drink coffee whilst you're pregnant, the coffee will go into the gut and it gets broken down by the liver, because the liver itself has a specific enzyme that breaks it down. This doesn't exist in the fetus. And what we know is that the amount of caffeine that's in your bloodstream mirrors the exact same amount that's in the fetus, because it just crosses the placenta easily. And when in the fetus, it can't be broken down because they don't have this necessary enzyme. So it will go through the baby's circulation, come back into the maternal circulation, so the mother's circulation, and that's where it gets broken down. And on top of this, you also have a situation where when you're pregnant, the caffeine itself is just broken down slower. So by the 3rd trimester, you can have caffeine that stays in your system for about 18 hours compared to someone who's not pregnant, where it gets broken down in 4 hours. So that's a considerable amount of time longer with which the caffeine is circulating around. What the studies have suggest could happen for the fetus is that it increases things like the stress hormone levels, which affect the blood flow through the placenta to the baby and therefore can cause pregnancy complications. So the ones that have been more strongly seen to be associated with caffeine intake are the increased risk of having a miscarriage, the increased risk of having a stillbirth, the increased risk of having a lower for gestational size baby, so having a lower birth weight baby. And then they're suggesting that it can cause some child conditions and diseases, as well as increase the risk of childhood obesity. So these things are quite a lot. In some particular studies, that this is a dose-related effect. If you have a tiny bit of caffeine, it does exert some effect, but not as much as if you have a higher amount of caffeine. And one particular paper that looked at a amount of studies basically called for caffeine to be banned full stop, because that safe level is not clear. It is not determined when safe is safe, because everybody's an individual. The way you break down coffee will be different from the way I break down coffee. So how do we know caffeine reacts to you versus me in pregnancy? And I think that's a really important point to take. And I'm not saying don't do it at all. I'm just saying think about that versus the guideline recommendations. Because we also know that guidelines suggest that alcohol consumption outside of pregnancy in moderation is safe. We know on a physiological level, so on a human biology level, that actually potentially no amount of alcohol is safe. It's associated with dependence, affects your liver, and actually lots of people who have gone completely sober have said that they've realised they don't have as much brain fog, they don't have as much fatigue. So when on a sort of bigger scale, when guidelines suggest any substance safe in moderation, who's winning? Who's winning? And now I think this is where the real question comes in. Why are so many of us relying on caffeine? That's the real question. Why do so many of us need caffeine to get through the day? And the problem is fatigue, right? Fatigue in your normal day-to-day life is the reason why a lot of people reach for caffeine. It's a very widely used psychoactive substance. Gives you a perk, gets you through the day. But why is that translated into pregnancy? In the first trimester, fatigue is common. It is so common. About 90% of pregnant women in the first trimester experience fatigue. It is not a character flaw, right? It's just your body changing. You've got an increase in hormones, so the progesterone levels are going up. Your blood volume changes, your heart rate changes, your metabolic system is changing. And on top of that, you've got a placenta and a baby that's growing. So all of this is enough reason for you to feel tired. So you might have heard that a normal adult needs 7 to 9 hours of sleep. In pregnancy, especially in the first trimester, you might need to think about increasing that by 50%. And again, nuance, it will be different for different people. So if we accept that pregnancy, especially in the first 12 weeks, is a period of fatigue, why doesn't the system accommodate for that? Why is it that so many women live, especially the first trimester, in silence? You can't let them know at work. You don't really tell your social circle. So everyone in that period of time doesn't know you're pregnant and expects the same level of productivity, expects the same level of energy expenditure. And I think that's also a question in society. Why do we hide pregnancy in the first 12 weeks? Yes, we know that the risk of miscarriage is higher then, but so what? And this is just a question that I'm genuinely baffled by. And not to say it's not something I've done myself, but it is something that I'm genuinely baffled by. When we need the help and the support the most, we are silenced and advised to be silenced in the first trimester. And then what are we given? Caffeine to cope. Caffeine just to get through the day. And I think that's where the real question lies. So it's all well and good for a guideline to say no more than 200 milligrams a day. But what about the guideline about how systems can change to support the first trimester? So just to bring balance to this video, if you shouldn't drink caffeine because of all the negative effects it can have, what should you do instead? Things that may help increasing your sleep. Don't feel like you have to be Superwoman and sleep more. Nap during the day if possible. Think about your diet. So if you have sugar highs at lunchtime because you've eaten a large carb meal, oftentimes, even outside of pregnancy, you'll get that slump. You'll get that, like, they call it the itis, where you really just want to sleep it off. So if you think about having a more balanced meal, slightly lower carb or more complex carbs that prevent the sugar spikes, it may well then manage the fatigue that you're experiencing. So there may be a role that diet plays in this. You can think about potentially inducing your brain to have a placebo effect. So maybe swapping out for a decaf coffee or for a non-caffeinated herbal tea or even just warm water, and see if that changes your reliance on caffeine, because there is a strong placebo effect that might be induced. And then just be realistic about your energy levels. Don't force productivity. If you have things that you want to accomplish, fine, but just do so knowing that the trade-off is your energy levels. If you're at work, but then what can be done outside of you? Like, what role can society play to make life easier for you? In the UK, there are laws laws around make risk assessments in pregnancy at all times of pregnancy, actually, to make sure that you are kept safe. And so I know that there is also the trade-off of, if you tell them at work that you're pregnant, you might lose out on certain promotions, which again there are laws against, or get treated differently, which again there are laws against. But these are the things that can prevent us being open at work. But on the flip side, if you are open, certain risk assessments, adjustments to work can be made or should be made to enable you to cope with pregnancy and survive in the workplace, to maintain your productivity levels. And if you're working in the home, then enlisting your partner for more support, outsourcing if it's at all financially possible, and taking more rest where you can to make sure that you and your baby are kept healthy during this period. If you knew that you could get an extra 2 hours in bed at night and maybe an afternoon nap, the need for caffeine would reduce. I think so. So the question again isn't, should you be drinking caffeine? How much caffeine should you drink? But how can the system and support be made available so that you can have the rest that's required in pregnancy in order to be productive? I would like to imagine a world where pregnancy was supported and not just endured, not just survived, not just get on with it. Where women aren't just handed a list of to-do, ignoring the system that governs all that, and where caffeine specifically wouldn't feel like an essential tool. And I say this as a mum who worked through both pregnancies and had to rely on caffeine at times to get through a 12-hour shift. Because the real issue was actually never coffee in the first place. It's exhaustion. And that's what the question should be around. If this changed how you see pregnancy, then please share this with someone who needs the permission to rest. If you are pregnant yourself, please have permission to rest. And if you want pregnancy and the postpartum period explained with context, then this is the channel. Come back for more. Until next time.